This is Tim Bryce with my column titled Business Writing, a crash course on writing for people in a business setting. How a person writes for personal purposes is substantially different than how they should write for business. Whereas the former requires no discipline, the latter requires poise, discipline, and attention to detail. However, unless corrected or properly supervised, sloppy habits will inevitably turn up in business writings. Remarkably, companies spend little time teaching their employees how to write in various business situations. Consequently, trouble arises in sales and customer service settings, not to mention vendor relations. There are many instances where it is necessary to write for business, be it through correspondence such as letters, emails, and faxes, proposals such as RFPs, RFIs, RFQs, etc., feasibility studies, policies and memos, administrative procedures, audits, employee reviews. You get the idea. Aside from possessing an understanding of grammar and language, it is necessary to convey a professional image. This sends an important message. The author does not take the subject matter lightly and should be regarded as competent and credible in the subject matter. To do so, the author must be cognizant of both the content and the format, the packaging, if you will. A narrative should be factual and represent a logical progression of ideas. Word choice and sentence structure should be kept simple. A verbose vocabulary can alienate readers as opposed to supporting your message. Likewise, avoid colloquial expressions, jargonese, and slang. Again, keep it simple. Above all, concentrate on benefits and how they will affect the other party. By doing so, the reader learns to appreciate your argument and why your message is so important. Learn to write tightly, meaning avoid long and flowing sentences. Think economy of effort and keep it simple and to the point. By doing so, you are creating a professional image, not just of yourself, but of your company as well. In terms of packaging, learn to divide paragraphs into smaller sections separated by a space. The intent is to encourage your readers to review your text, not avoid it. There should be sufficient margins to force the text to smaller and easier to digest sentences. It is also useful to highlight sections and key comments, either by using a bold font, italics, or an underline. But do not use such highlights excessively, thereby becoming an amateurish distraction. In terms of fonts, stick with a standard, such as Arial and Times New Roman, the two most commonly used fonts in the world. Flashy fonts may be interesting, but if they hinder the ability to read your narrative, it is useless. As another rule of thumb, avoid the use of jokes. In this day and age of political correctness, such humor may be misinterpreted and possibly lead to allegations of sexism and racism and ultimately termination of employment. The following are some basic tips for the different types of business writings. First, let's talk about correspondence. Observe the use of honorifics and titles and names, such as Mr. John Doe, Dr. John Doe, Ms. Betty Jones, Mrs. Sally Black, Director of Human Resources, Software Engineer, etc. Use the old military trick. Begin by telling the reader what you are going to tell them, and at the end, tell them what you have told them. Write an email just as you would a business letter. Avoid the temptation to use slang, even in an email. If you are writing a letter, consider printing it on some professional stock as opposed to plain white paper. The feel of paper adds a touch of class to your message. Next, let's turn to proposals. In most cases, it is necessary to follow the format as prescribed by the requester. This is particularly true in RFQ, RFI, RFP situations. If possible, investigate the names of the other vendors who will also be responding. In many cases, proposals are designed for a specific vendor. If so, do not waste your time and simply thank the requester for the opportunity to review the proposal. Give considerable thought to packaging the proposal for readability and to highlight key sections. Try to reflect a sense of class, thereby reflecting well on your business. Next, let's talk about customer service. Respond to customer compliments, complaints, or suggestions tactfully and positively. If a customer becomes combative, it may be necessary to seek legal counsel. Next, we have policies. Policy manuals, also known as employee handbooks, are tightly worded legal descriptions of the official policies of the company. Great care should be taken in writing policies, preferably by someone intimate with the policies and knowledge of legal wording. Although many companies ask law firms to write such documents, it can also be done internally by skilled writers. Policies address such things as equal employment opportunity, sexual harassment, hiring, employment agreement, orientation and training, medical procedures, probation, transfer, promotion, etc., etc., etc. Policy manuals typically organized by common types of policies and follow a numbering scheme for quick reference. Each policy is written with a definition of the policy, followed by terms, conditions, and additional notes. Next, let's turn to memos. Memorandums are now issued more by email as opposed to on printed paper. Nonetheless, they should not be crafted frivolously, as employees may misinterpret it and use it as an excuse for not executing an order. In fact, the fewer the memos, the better. However, if you have to issue a memo to one or more employees, write it particularly tightly. Define the purpose of the memo, why is it being issued, and explain what employees are expected to do about it. Instead of an electronic version, consider printing it on paper and ask for employees to initial it, thereby confirming their understanding of it and have it returned to the author. Next, we have feasibility studies. Feasibility studies are used to study a business problem or opportunity and recommend a course of action. There are 6 basic parts to any such study. The project scope, which is used to define the business problem and/or opportunity to be addressed. The scope should be definitive and to the point. Rambling narrative serves no purpose and can actually confuse project participants. It is also necessary to define the parts of the business affected, either directly or indirectly, including project participants and end-user areas affected by the project. The project sponsor should be identified, particularly if he/she is footing the bill. Second part is the current analysis, which is used to define and understand the current method of implementation, such as a system, a product, and so on. From this analysis, it is not uncommon to discover there is actually nothing wrong with the current system or product, other than some misunderstandings regarding it, or perhaps it needs some simple modifications as opposed to a major overhaul. Also, the strengths and weaknesses of the current approach are identified, both pros and cons. In addition, there may very well be elements of the current system or product that may be used in its successor, thus saving time and money later on. Without such analysis, this may never be discovered. Number 3, we have requirements. How requirements are defined depends on the object of the project's attention. For example, how requirements are specified for a product are substantially different than requirements for an edifice, a bridge, or an information system. Each exhibits totally different properties and as such are defined differently. Next, we have the approach, which represents the recommended solution or course of actions to satisfy the requirements. Here, various alternatives are considered, along with an explanation as to why the preferred approach was selected. In terms of design-related project, it is here where whole rough designs, also known as renderings, are developed in order to determine viability. It is also at this point where the use of existing structures and commercial alternatives are considered, such as build versus buy decisions. The overriding considerations, though, are: does the recommended approach satisfy the requirements? Is it also a practical and viable solution? A thorough analysis here is needed in order to perform the next step, which is evaluation. This examines the cost-effectiveness of the approach selected. This begins with an analysis of the estimated total cost of the project. In addition to the recommended solution, other alternatives are estimated in order to offer an economic comparison. For development purposes, an estimate of labor and out-of-pocket expenses is assembled, along with a project schedule showing the project path and start and end dates. After the total cost of the project has been calculated, a cost and evaluation summary is prepared, which includes such things as a cost-benefit analysis, return on investment, etc. And finally, we do a review. All of the preceding elements are then assembled into a feasibility study, and a formal review is conducted with all parties involved. The review serves 2 purposes: to substantiate the thoroughness and accuracy of the feasibility study, and to make a project decision, either approve it, reject it, or ask that it be revised before making a final decision. If approved, it is very important that all parties sign the document which expresses their acceptance and commitment to it. It may be a seemingly small gesture, but signatures carry a lot of weight later on as the project progresses. If the feasibility study is rejected, the reasons for its rejection should be explained and attached to the document. For busy executives, provide a cover page with an executive summary stating the highlights of the study. such as its business purpose and why it is necessary to pursue this problem opportunity, the type of requirements being addressed, the proposed solution, costs, and the return on investment. In other words, this is where the real sales job is performed. Next, let's talk about audits. After completing a major project, it is a good idea to conduct what is called a project audit. The idea is to document what went right and wrong during a project and hopefully learn something beneficial from the experience. The project auditor should analyze the following. First, estimated versus actual schedules and estimates, both costs and time. Second, a final cost-benefit analysis should be prepared, which hopefully can be compared to one prepared in the initial feasibility study. 3, if the project is product-oriented, to design and develop something, an analysis of the finished product versus its design specifications should be prepared. And 4, conduct interviews with project participants to gather insight as to what went right and wrong. The final report should be professionally prepared and presented to pertinent managers and executives to study. The presentation should be somewhat clinical in nature, as the presenter should avoid both disparaging and complimentary remarks, as they may offend someone. Just be matter of fact in the presentation and let the reviewers come to their own conclusions. Next, we talk about corporate blogs. If you're charged with maintaining a corporate blog, you must always be mindful the blog is a window to your corporate world. Extra care must be considered when stating policy or issuing a press release. Do not open the kimono unnecessarily. Review the wording carefully, but it is also wise to have another set of eyes carefully review the postings before releasing it. Someone in authority or perhaps an attorney. For all postings, be sure to include copyright notations to show the business is the owner of the work and it is not to be redistributed without permission. Some sample notation would be copyright 2015 by ABC Company, all rights reserved. Next, let's talk about employee reviews. It has long been customary in business to periodically evaluate employee performance, such as 30 days before hiring, or at regular intervals, such as annually or biannually. The purpose is to have the manager assess the employee's strengths and weaknesses and make recommendations for improvement. The intent is to help the employee improve as a worker as opposed to assassinate his character. Reviewing an employee with malicious intent is just plain wrong, as is giving a rosy review. Both are detrimental to communicating to the employee where they stand in the eyes of management and how they can improve themselves. Present your analysis matter-of-factly and provide suggestions for the employee to improve. The use of standard forms for this task is strongly recommended. And next, let's talk about procedures. Writing procedures for people is much more difficult than for computers. Computers will do whatever you ask, right or wrong, at great speed. In contrast, writing for the human being is more difficult as people are more emotional and can be lazy and uncooperative at times. Writing procedures for people, therefore, can be an arduous task. Instituting writing standards can materially help in bringing about consistency to this task and should be encouraged. One technique we have found to be beneficial is play script, developed by Les Mathias and ultimately based on scripts to a play. There are just 3 parts to a play script procedure. Number 1 is purpose, a concise statement expressing the business purpose of the procedure and for whom it is intended to be used. Number 2, setup, a listing of the inputs and outputs, the forms and screens the user will need access to, as well as other pertinent software and hardware. Number 3, operational steps, a numerically listed set of steps to execute the procedure, written with the following rules. Begin each new operation with a verb, such as accept, establish, perform, develop, mark, terminate. You get the idea. Do not begin the first sentence of the operational step with a condition clause such as if, when, or should. Begin the sentence with compare or evaluate as a verb. For example, compare the value of DD1 to DD2. If DD1 is greater than DD2, go to step 4. If DD2 is greater than DD1, go to step 27. If a single operational step is complicated, it may be divided into subsections. For example, evaluate the value of DD1. A, if DD1 equals 1, go to step 2. B, if DD2 equals 2, go to step 6. For additional information, see the new play script procedure by Les Mathias. And let's go over some basic grammar. There are some other simple rules to observe when writing for business. First, Use present tense. Avoid future tense using shall or will unless you are actually referring to a future event or you want to make a strong promise or threat. Second, use functional titles rather than personal pronouns. For example, systems engineering versus systems engineer, project management versus project manager. Other considerations. Begin a sentence with when rather than once. Say help with rather than help in. Do not begin a sentence with because or therefore. Replace lastly with finally. Do not begin sentences with words like firstly, secondly, or thirdly. Beware of the excessive use of the words that and which, two words tending to be used excessively. For each occurrence of the word in your test, ask yourself if you can reconstruct the sentence without it. And avoid the use of words with apostrophes, such as can't, haven't, I've, isn't. This leads to sloppy writing habits. Spell them out instead. And by all means, please learn to use spell and grammar checkers as found in word processing software. Cultivating a professional image in business writing requires discipline and practice. Herein I have covered the fundamentals for the sake of brevity. Obviously, there is much more to be discussed. Again, remember, by telling the reader what you're going to tell them, and at the end, tell them what you told them. When writing for business, it is perhaps best to remember the following quote from Michelangelo: "Trifles make perfection, and perfection is no trifle." Friends, keep the faith. This is Tim Bryce in Palm Harbor, Florida. TimBryce.com.